After the massacre of Simchat Torah, October 7th, I invited a group of smart young scholars together and said, listen, each of us individually has been studying the Rebbe's guidance on Israel's security for many years now. But now, let's look at the material from a different perspective. Rather than locating another talk by the Rebbe about Israel, uncovering another letter, another interview, we need to study and understand in a more structured way what the fundamentals are here. The big picture approach to Israel's peace and security that the Rebbe has been communicating all these years. It was a small distinction, but a very important one. My name is Rebbe Elkanah Shmatkin, and I've been researching and publishing on the Rebbe's approach to Israel's security for 25 years now. Welcome to the Rebbe's Roadmap to Peace, a series on the Rebbe's guidance for how Israel can win its conflicts, achieve peace, and assure its security once and for all. This group of scholars turned into a think tank of sorts, and we dedicated countless hours to study, understand, and argue the Rebbe's approach, Torah's approach, to how Israel can win and have peace long term. We compressed a PhD's worth of study into several months, and really we're still at it. Now, through our journey, we identified a number of very specific and clear strategic principles. How Israel can deter her enemies and assure her own security, what to do for each of the major questions she faces, and how to manage her relationship with the United States. How should Israel communicate its positions, both domestically within Israel and outwardly to the world? And how, when we need to fight, to do so compassionately. The good news is, we can achieve victory, we can have peace, we can have respect, if we want it. Now, if you want to boil the whole approach down to one item, I think it would be this: Jewish confidence. When Jews truly embrace their identities, and when we embrace Israel's identity as a Jewish land as Torah lays it out for us, it changes absolutely everything. Does that sound a bit simple? Well, let's take a step back for a moment. What are we doing in Israel? Here's a talk by the Rebbe in January 1975 with high-level representatives from the US and Israeli governments in attendance.
Waren das alles, was gemacht geworden, a Bris Eilo, zwischen dem Ebersten mit Abrahamen und Sare Achrov Adema. A das ist a Rachon, na Sates Oretz Azeis. Wo das ist der Stand Matone, wo das ist der Inne, was geht und verstarrt und bei Jakel Lechol Boe Relo, die Scheich ist von Iden mit Teres Akedisch. I das, wo das a Bris Elam zwischen dem Ebersten, was beide Elam an Hige, mit Bnei Avram, Yitzchak und Yankel, is a Racho ad Elam, aber kommt mit der Teine, a sichere Sache mit Masnier sein.
Our connection to the land of Israel began right as the Jewish nation began. It was at that dramatic scene, the covenant between the parts, where God appears in the form of fire and smoke and makes a promise to the first Jew. He promises Abraham that, number one, his children will be enslaved in Egypt and will eventually be redeemed. And two, the land of Canaan, home of 7 nations, will be given to his descendants. God says to him, the Jewish people will face difficult times, but they will persevere. And they will inherit the land of Israel. A couple of chapters later, God adds that Israel will belong to the Jewish people as an eternal possession. And this gift of Israel to the Jews is repeated to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob throughout the book of Genesis many, many times. So it's important for us to realize just how early and how deeply the land of Israel is baked into our identity as the people of Israel. Now, the obvious question is, how will the world respond to this explanation? The answer, the Rebbe says, is to start from the beginning. Literally, the very first verse of the Torah reads, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rashi, is the most prolific and revered commentator on the Torah. He lived in the 11th century. For over 600 years now, Rashi has been the quintessential commentator. He's been teaching Torah to every Jewish man, woman, and child who studies Torah. In his very first entry on Genesis, Rashi asks, the Torah is a book of commandments. Why did God begin with the story of creation rather than the first commandment to the Jewish people? In this 1979 talk, the Rebbe teaches the first Rashi, just as Jewish school teachers have done through the ages.
Omer Rab Yitzchak, lehoye tzorich lehafchil es hatelo, elo ma'achedesh hazeh lochem, shehi mitzvah rishena shenitztavu bo Yisro. ומה טעם פוסק בבראשיס משום כיח מייסוב היגיד לעמי לוסס להם נחלס גי שאם יאמרו ומישראל לישראל ליסטימתם שכבשתם ארצי שיבס גי הם אמרים להם כל האורץ של הקדוש ברוך הוא ברוא ונסונו לאשר יושר בעינו, ברצוני נוסנו להם, וברצוני נוטלו להם, נוסנו לנו את אוגי מיד.
Jewish people finished their journey in the desert. There were 7 nations living in what was then called Canaan. Moses passed away, and led by Moses' successor Joshua, the Jews conquered the land of Israel exactly as God had told them they would 470 years prior. The Rebbe points out that Rashi is telling us straight up that in the future the nations will come along and will lecture us from a perspective of righteousness.
Und nicht hast wir schon, sie sagen, als ein Egeda Jesche verkehrt. In der Ruhe besteht der Zedek und Jesche, als wie mit Tormen zum Kinavle, bemele Tormen nicht Gesel sein, Tormen nicht zunehmen, auf dem Stikulär, bei dem, was gehört zu der Schäbe ist. Hebt so Rashi und sagt, Bereiche der Ronexin, aber man soll wissen sein, ab Psag din Beteire. Aber man sagt schon, Lechatchile, als es sein, als in Zeit. Und nicht mit sagen, Golui. Aber man will etwas zunehmen, man will etwas tun an Navle. Die Teine sind verkehrt mit rechtfertigen Menschen. Wir sind ja an Noschem Tzadikim, man jagt sich nach Scholem. Man will darf gescholem. Aber wie bald man darf scholem, darf sich sein verbunden auf Niton an Navle des Zweiten, hat doch ein Gasloni Matte.
Now, Rashi's self-stated goal is to explain the straightforward meaning of Torah to a 5-year-old. But in this first entry, he departs from his style and A, gives us not an interpretation of the verse, but an instruction, a directive, and B, tells us how to deal with a situation that is going to arise in the future. Now, Rashi's times were not especially peaceful. He was living in France, the city of Troyes specifically. Jews are being murdered across Europe. Tens of thousands, in fact, were being killed. Entire communities were wiped out. The Christians and the Muslims are fighting over control of the Holy Land, and in his times, nobody is even talking about the Jews and Israel at all.
Was Rashi gewährt, man in das Land ist, man hat sehr gedacht. Und hat gewusst, was nicht in dies, was sie kommen, der nehmen mit einer kleinen Palpitäre. Rashi erzählt ein Kind von 5 Jahren, was lebt in der Zeit, wo man so ist, du kannst durch Movement, wo der wollte gewähnt, alle in Jahren, was man getan nicht, bedürfen, wie man getan hat, man in Flammen, bei der Ende sei in Deutschland. Du hast gewähnt, nicht in Deutschland, in Dienst als möglich, von Frankreich, wo Chulo, heute bis hier. Umzugehen, der Rashi zu einem Kind von 5 Jahren, und sagt ihm, du hast dich zu tun mit Goyi. Ich hab gesagt, Goyi, weil man die Fragen hat, dass er gewonnen hatte. Mit zugenommen beim Kasaka nicht so. Schätze hat damit, dass mir sich das gefehlt. Es nicht, soll ihm entfernen, Stama sehr bisschen Jonen, soll ihm entfernen, als steht in Teil. Keir, Meister, Higil, Arme, lass es ihm Nachlass gehen, Rashi bringt es herauf.
As you explain this, the Rebbe says, be sure to point out that for centuries on end now, Jewish children have been learning this just as they begin to study Torah from the beginning. We need to know, and they need to know, that this is in our mother's milk. This was not invented in 1948. Torah has been studied this way, with this entry just beneath the first verse, and it's been printed this way since the first printing presses in the 1400s. Just before I came over here, I took a quick look around my home. Between our living room, the study, and the children's rooms, I counted 29 copies of Chumash. And without exception, every single one of them has Rashi right beneath it. Now, I won't claim that mine is a typical Jewish home, but you get the idea. Walk into a Jewish home anywhere in the world today and check out the results. And it's been this way for centuries. What explanations have we been using? Well, we've tried to explain that we have a right to the land because after the Holocaust, the UN told us it's ours.
Formally declare Israel admitted to membership in the United Nations.
We've tried to cite the British government's 1917 Balfour Agreement declaring a Jewish homeland. Our recent argument has been, look what kind of barbarians we're fighting here. Well, how have all those arguments been working out for us so far? What will work, the Rebbe says, is how about we just try saying the truth?
Alle Teines, Schönes und Schönes, was man gekonnt hat und hat nicht geändert. Der ein und einzige Teine, was weiß davon ein 5-jähriger Kind und was gedruckt, am meisten hunderte Jahre hast du schon gedruckt. Und darauf ist das gewesen, kam der ist Bixar. Und jeder Kind, viele von die, was einen nicht gelernt in der Yeshiva und der Kehle, mehr nicht wie gegangen in Cheder, ist bereiches von seinem Leben, der Teil hat ihm übergegeben, den Menschen vergeudet. Und das ist der einzige Teil, was bis sich schämt, mit sich zu sagen.
But the vast majority of the world hasn't heard of Rashi and might not even believe in the Torah. Don't we need arguments from their world? How is this going to be effective? Well, guess what? They don't need to believe in Rashi or even in the Torah to be convinced. What they need is for you to know it. Tell me, the people who are impressed with the religious zeal of the Arabs, did they all believe in the Quran? If you believe it, have the self-confidence to say the truth and articulate clearly what you hold precious and dear.
Und auf drauf gucken, reis Israel, werden jeden anheben erzählen, wo sie trachten, wo Israel verstehen, wie jeder trachten, wenn geht Israel. Und also hättelt am Reden mit der diplomatischen Loschen und schlagt sich an, öfter wirst bei ihm zunehmen, bei ihnen noch ein Stückchen und noch ein Stückchen, wo du wird man nicht sein. Und mit seinem verschrieben werden an dieser Ich-Zedek Creation. Ich-Zedek Creation, wo Chulu, sei wie sei gelebt im Niedergott. Nur rechnet, als sagt, dass ein Bebe und nach dem Meis Machuri Apargus, Gab mit Gabe oder Liebe, und aber redet nicht mit der jüdischen Loschen. Redet auch mit den Loschen, was mit der Esses mir ist, der Technik ist aber genommen.
In private correspondence, the Rebbe explained that this is not important only in order to explain our ownership, and it's not merely a theological argument. It's actually directly connected to security. Zalman Shazar, Israel's third president, was a member of Mapai, Israel's Socialist Party. In this letter from 1969, the Rebbe explains that he feels compelled to write to Shazar on this critical issue because no one else seems to be doing so. Israel's representatives in international forums consistently declare that it is an entity founded in 1948 on territories left by the British, from which the Haganah expelled the Arabs and where the UN permitted it to exist. My reply simply is, not true in the slightest. Israel is not a new entity. Rather, in 1948, a significant part of the land of Israel was liberated. Now, this isn't just semantics, it's a key difference. Putting forth Israel as a state established in 1948 with the approval of the nations of the world constitutes no substantive answer to the claims of the Arabs, the Vatican, the UN, and those Jews who declare that you are thieves for having conquered the lands of other nations. But this argument has been used by those who set Israel's messaging to the international community. It has caused harm in the past, it presently causes harm to the vital interests of the State of Israel, and it has led to many casualties. The fact is that the Jews have returned to the land of Israel, an inheritance with no pause, even when they were forcibly displaced. Now, I do not delude myself into believing that arguments of justice and fairness will prevail in the UN or the Vatican. But the most important factor here is the morale of the youth, including members of the IDF and the students in the United States and elsewhere. I declare once, twice, and 3 times that people who live in Zion live in the land of Israel, a land that is special and unlike any other. It is not merely a country that sits between Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and Egypt. I demand with great emotion that Israel's representatives in Washington and the UN declare this fact and that they bang on the table while doing so. This could be a massive job to educate all of Israel on this, no? Well, no. Here's an interview we did with Shlomo Shamir, a journalist for Haaretz, Yediot, Ma'ariv, and other Israeli publications. He's reading from his notes about a 1969 audience that he had with the Rebbe.
הוא אמר שהתושבים של בארץ ישראל הם מאמינים גדולים. הם מאמינים באלוקים, הם מאמינים בשבועה של אברהם, כי לך ולזרעך אתן הארץ הזאת. אני רואה ברשימות שלי, הוא אמר, זה ממש, זה ציטוט ממש ממה שהוא אמר. כל אחד ואחד מתושבי ישראל כיום מאמין גדול הינהו. לפעמים גם אם הוא לא יודע בעצמו שזה כך. ארץ ישראל, הוא אמר, היא חבית מלאה וקדושה באמונה. חסר רק ניצוץ שיצית את החבית הזו ויגרום להתלקחות של אמונה. אמרתי, תסתכל למשל על יהודי שחי בארץ ישראל, נגיד אפילו הוא קומוניסט. הוא יושב בארץ עם אשתו, עם הילדים, משפחתו, בארץ מוקפת, שונאים שרוצים להשמיד את המדינה ואותו. מה מחזיק יהודי כזה בארץ ישראל? הוא יושב בארץ ישראל והוא חי בה וגם הולך לצבא להגן עליה, מבלי שידע על כך, הוא מאמין באלוקים. הוא מאמין שארץ ישראל ניתנה לעם ישראל. אבל צריך לדעת איך לעורר את האמונה הזו בקיבוץ.
In the Rebbe's view, before we get to the Jewish rules of self-defense, before we get to how to handle Israel's diplomatic relations and the morale of the IDF, and how to handle the enemies outside and inside of Israel, we need to be comfortable to step into our own identities as Jews and to be clear about what our connection is to Israel. And just as for the thousands of years when most Jews lived outside of Israel, we all still called it Artseinu, our land, so too every Jew everywhere in the world has a deep, essential connection with Israel. I look forward to seeing you on the next of the series where we delve into the Jewish rules of self-defense.